Chapter 1. Just returning home after a business trip of over a month, without even having time to change out of my police uniform, I was reassigned to escort a young woman to the police station to file a report and then to the hospital for a health check. While holding the medical card at the payment counter, I suddenly felt dizzy and inexplicably nauseous. Recalling the recent unusual symptoms in my body, along with the fact that my period hadn't arrived this month, a vivid image of Andrew Tate's sweat-drenched face from the night before my business trip suddenly flashed in my mind. After arranging everything properly for the reporting individual, I rushed to the obstetrics department for a checkup. Looking at the test results with the words, "pregnant," clearly written, my mind went blank. I completely failed to notice that the doctor who initially examined me had now been replaced by someone else. "Is it certain that I'm pregnant?" I asked in astonishment, glancing at the doctor opposite me, who was also holding the test results, their hands trembling even more than mine. Before I could hear an answer, a familiar male voice called out from behind me, "Vivian Hayes." I turned around and saw Victor Bennett standing at the clinic door, holding several large bags of fruit. After 3 months apart, his once long and messy hair had been shaved clean, giving him a much tidier appearance. However, the stubble on his chin couldn't hide his disheveled state. Clinging to the result paper in my hand like it was a lifeline, he asked, "Did you break up with me so decisively before because you were pregnant?" "What? Did he just make up an entire runaway with a child drama for me?" "You're wrong, Vivian. Can we have this baby together? The child will take my surname." I was about to speak when the doctor, who was bent over writing a prescription, suddenly let out a cold snort. "What? You want my child to call you Dad?" I was stunned for a few seconds, then looked up into the crystal-clear blue eyes of the doctor sitting across from me, exclaiming in surprise, "Andrew Tate? A few days ago, you texted me saying you were off today. Why are you at the hospital?" The person called by name responded nonchalantly with a simple, but the tone carried a hint of resentment for being recognized. Victor Bennett looked at Andrew Tate in confusion, his anger rising. "Dr. Tate, what do you mean by that?" Andrew Tate put down the pen, his gaze sweeping over both me and Victor Bennett, and replied coldly, "Exactly what it sounds like. Vivian, are you trying to scare me?" Victor Bennett, in a panic, reached out to grab my hand, but Andrew Tate immediately stood up, stepping in front of me. Victor Bennett shoved him and shouted, "What the hell are you, anyway?" Andrew Tate, caught off guard, was pushed back. His icy blue eyes seemed to freeze over as he grabbed Victor Bennett by the collar. "What am I?" Andrew Tate, like a victor, sneered into Victor Bennett's ear, "The report states that Vivian Hayes is 1 month pregnant. 1 month ago, Vivian Hayes and I got married voluntarily and on equal terms." "Victor Bennett, I heard you're a lawyer. Do you need me to explain the meaning of voluntary and equal to you? 3 months ago, my boyfriend, the one I had been considering marrying, was caught cheating. I immediately broke up with him. My father, worried that I might overthink things on my own, kept arranging blind dates for me. That's how I met Andrew Tate. Not long after, my father suddenly fell ill and had to be hospitalized. I was away on a business trip and couldn't return immediately. I was so worried that I broke down in tears. Searching through my contacts, I realized Andrew Tate was the only doctor I knew. At 3 in the morning, I called him. Despite being woken up, he didn't show the slightest annoyance. Instead, he gently reassured me, "It's okay, I'm here." Andrew Tate's work was even busier than mine, but during the 2 weeks my father was in the hospital, he spent more time taking care of him than I did. During the day, he could be performing surgeries non-stop, but at night, he still stayed at the hospital to watch over my father. One time, I worked overtime and arrived at the hospital late. From afar, I saw Andrew Tate's tall figure curled up on a bench outside the ward. I draped my coat over him, and he woke up immediately. He gently brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, then tugged at my sleeve playfully, "Do you care about me? If you do, make it up to me. What does Dr. Tate want as compensation?" Andrew Tate's blue eyes flickered slightly before finally settling on my face. I have a stable job, a house, a car, I don't smoke or drink, and I have no bad habits, he said, slowly and deliberately. Vivian Hayes, would you consider trying marriage with me? As he spoke, his voice carried the slight rasp of someone who had just woken up, yet every word felt as soft as strands of hair tickling my heart. The night we received our marriage certificate, Andrew Tate and I went home. From the hallway to the bed, we kissed passionately. At the final moment, Andrew Tate asked if it was okay. I nodded and wrapped my arms around his neck. As darkness and Andrew Tate enveloped me, I thought to myself, if marriage is simply about finding someone to spend your days with, at the very least, Andrew Tate is more sincere than Victor Bennett. The girl who came to report the case was in an unstable mood, so I had to stay with her at the hospital until her family arrived. Andrew Tate texted me, telling me to come to his office after I was done so we could go home together. I met Andrew Tate's friend, Michael Carter, in the hallway. From afar, he teased me, I was wondering why Dr. Tate was so kind to swap his night shift with me yesterday. Turns out it's because Officer Vivian is coming back today. I glared at him. Your mouth is really something else. You didn't see Andrew Tate this morning, did you? As soon as we came down the stairs and mentioned we saw you, he immediately ran up to find you. Michael Carter spoke while clicking his tongue in amazement. It's the first time I've seen our usually composed Dr. Tate so hurried. He suddenly changed his tone, eyeing me suspiciously. By the way, what were you doing in the obstetrics department early this morning? Michael Carter stared at my stomach as if he had just realized something, then cursed in frustration, damn it, Andrew Tate really is fast, quick in everything. Chapter 2. During the lunch break, Victor Bennett's mother called me and asked me to take her to the hospital. That was when I found out that Andrew Tate was the primary doctor treating Victor Bennett's mother. A few days ago, I saw Victor Bennett at the hospital, and it turned out he was there to pick up some medication. No wonder the conversation between Andrew Tate and Victor Bennett that day didn't sound like they were meeting for the first time. Victor Bennett's mother had to be admitted to the hospital, but there wasn't enough time for lunch there, so I ran to a small eatery across the street to buy noodles. I bought 2 servings of noodles, neither with cilantro. When I returned, Victor Bennett was also there. He stood up, took the food from my hands, and said emotionally, Vivian, you even remembered that I don't eat cilantro. I thought to myself, clearly, it's his mother who doesn't eat cilantro, so what is he doing? As I was about to leave, Victor Bennett's mother held my hand tightly and asked, Vivian, I just want to take this opportunity to reunite you and Victor Bennett. Is there really no chance for the two of you? Auntie, I'm already married. Married? Victor Bennett's mother repeated in surprise, Vivian, you're not joking with me, are you? Suddenly, the curtain of the bed next to Victor Bennett's mother's was pulled back from the inside, and I saw Andrew Tate, as if performing a magic trick, pushing a medical card out. I can confirm, he said, she's already married, to me. Today, Andrew Tate and I were supposed to finish work early and head to my father's house for dinner together. However, this afternoon, the phone theft group we had been monitoring made a move. We mobilized and managed to catch the culprit, but it was already past 7 in the evening. During that time Andrew Tate called me 3 times, but I couldn't answer. When I arrived, I saw Andrew Tate sitting on a long bench in the lobby, looking like a child waiting for their parents to pick them up. Feeling incredibly guilty, I hurried over and said, Sorry, I kept you waiting. Andrew Tate shook his head, grabbed my wrist, and asked, What's this here? I looked closely, but didn't see anything. Andrew Tate seemed amused by my confusion. He held onto my hand and said, I know there's nothing there, I just needed an excuse to hold your hand. He pouted playfully, when other husbands finish their shifts at the hospital, their wives come to pick them up. But I have to go searching for my wife. When I couldn't find you, I was so worried I almost called the police. He gently squeezed my wrist and sighed, then I remembered my wife is the police. Seeing that I was late, Andrew Tate had already called my dad to let him know we wouldn't make it for dinner tonight. Near the police station, there's a university district, and just a few streets away, there's a night market. We decided to head there for dinner instead. As we passed by a bubble tea shop, I felt thirsty and went in to buy 2 cups. Andrew Tate waited outside the shop by the door. Today, he wore a white shirt, jeans, Converse shoes, and carried a laptop backpack slung over one shoulder. Standing there, he looked so innocent, like a college student waiting for his girlfriend to finish class. Not long after, a young girl ran up to ask for his WeChat. I heard Andrew Tate tell the girl, "Sorry, I'm married, and my child has already finished elementary school." The young girl was surprised and stammered, "But you still look so young." Andrew Tate showed no emotion. "You're too kind." I brought out 2 cups of milk tea, and he walked over, inserted a straw into mine, and handed it back to me. One of his hands held mine, the other holding his cup of milk tea, though he hadn't taken a sip yet. I poked the back of his hand to remind him, "That one's for you." Hearing this, Andrew Tate immediately took a sip, then unexpectedly kissed me. He was so close that I could see the small mole on his eyelid and his lashes trembling slightly with the intensity of his kisses. The caramel scent of the milk tea quickly spread in my mouth. Andrew Tate's breath was both sweet and warm. He rarely acted so domineering. Dominating all my breath, he pulled me into his world, drowning me with him. When I felt like I might suffocate in his embrace, he finally let me go. Andrew Tate buried his head in my neck and whispered, "Vivian Hayes, I don't like milk tea. Remember that, okay?" Over the weekend, I went to the hospital to take a statement from the girl who filed a report the day before. In the morning, I hitched a ride with Andrew Tate to the hospital. The moment I got into the car, he startled me. I had no idea what kind of fashion statement he was making today, 36 degrees outside, yet he was covered head to toe like an Arab. As soon as I reached the door of the hospital room, I could hear yelling from inside. "You dare report this to the police? Let's see who will marry you now." If you hadn't dressed so provocatively or worked night shifts at that place, how would anyone have dared to harass you on the street? I pushed the door open and walked in. The girl was lying silently on the bed, while her father continued his tirade. "Sir, this is a hospital. Please keep quiet." I stepped forward and presented my police badge. "And even if your daughter were walking naked down the street, as long as she doesn't consent, no one has the right to force her. We now need to take the victim's statement. Please, anyone unrelated to the matter, leave the room." The man was furious, but didn't dare say anything. He let out a disgruntled huff and slammed the door as he left. Based on the girl's description and the composite sketch, we were certain this individual was the rapist and murderer who had fled from another province to our area. To catch this predator, 2 of our female colleagues, including myself, pretended to be drunk and wandered the streets alone for 3 consecutive nights. To keep Andrew Tate from worrying, I told him I was going on a business trip for a few days. Finally, on the 4th day, I encountered the murderer on the street where I was stationed. Initially, I thought I only needed to wait for him to approach, and the officers hiding in designated positions would jump out to subdue him. However, for some reason, the killer became highly alert and turned to flee when he was just 3 steps away from me. I immediately lunged forward and kicked him down. During the struggle, he pulled a knife from inside his jacket. Seeing the blade aimed at my abdomen, I rolled to the side to avoid it. The sound of the knife-piercing flesh echoed clearly in the quiet street that evening. When I was being placed in the ambulance, I insisted they not take me to the hospital affiliated with University B, where Andrew Tate worked. My colleague gave an awkward smile and pointed ahead at a man with a darkened expression holding a stretcher. "But Dr. Tate is already here." The rapist-murderer had stabbed me once in the right shoulder blade, leaving me unable to lift my arm for half a month. The station chief gave me special approval for a 1-month leave. Over the phone, he harshly scolded me. "You're 2 months pregnant and didn't report it to the team leader. You still recklessly threw yourself into danger. If something had happened, how would we explain it to Dr. Tate? How would we explain it to Comrade Lisa Hayes, your late mother?" I was granted 1 month of recovery at home, and Andrew Tate also took leave to stay home and take care of me. Having someone to take care of you when you're sick is, of course, a good thing, if that person doesn't create a gloomy atmosphere around you. Every day, he cooks, changes my bandages, and helps me bathe, as if completing a task. When he talks to me, it's just one sentence at most, and absolutely no second one follows. I thought perhaps it was because my job is too dangerous, and since I didn't tell him, it might have made him angry. So, I flattered him, trying every possible way to cheer him up for several days. One day, while he was working in his study, I brought in a plate of fruit. Andrew Tate saw me enter, nodded to signal me to place the plate on the table, and then gestured for me to leave. I acted cheerful, peeled a lychee, and held it up to him. "This is a lychee. You're not allowed to eat it unless you smile." Andrew Tate gave me a glance, then continued with his cold demeanor. I held my hand up for so long that my arm started to ache, but he still didn't move. The lychee fell with a plop into the trash can. "Andrew Tate, this is my job. If you regret marrying me, you can say it outright." "I don't regret it." I stood at the doorway of the study, and behind me, I heard the sound of Andrew Tate closing his laptop. But before that, I think I heard him say, "All right, class, that's all for today." Chapter 3. Don't you regret it? Then why weren't you happy when you found out I was pregnant? Since that day we returned from the hospital, although Andrew Tate didn't completely avoid mentioning my pregnancy, I could feel he was deliberately avoiding the topic. Andrew Tate sat on the chair for a long time without saying anything. Just as I thought he silently admitted it, he sighed heavily, as if surrendering, and said to me, "Vivian Hayes, I've never regretted it. It's not that I wasn't happy, it's that I was so happy I was afraid I'd lose myself in pride and forget where I was. I was scared to ask you, afraid I'd pressure you into keeping the baby for reasons you didn't want to. But I was also scared you'd say you wanted to keep the baby. I was afraid you'd love me only because of the baby, that you'd love me just because I'm the father, bound by family responsibilities to love me." Andrew Tate's gentle voice reached my ears. "Vivian Hayes, I know that love can eventually turn into familial affection. I also know you married me just to find a good partner for life. But I don't want you to start out without any love for me at all." I stood frozen, realizing that all my hidden thoughts had been known to him from the beginning. Andrew Tate continued, "I can respect all your choices. For instance, I understand why you hid your pregnancy from your teammates, fearing they'd treat you differently. You're strong, I get that. But that doesn't mean I don't feel pain when you're hurt." My eyes turned red as I choked out, "But you can't keep being so cold to me." "I have feelings too," he said. Andrew Tate stood up, gently pulling me into his arms, and stroking my hair, helplessly. "So, can you be a little more obedient, sweetheart?" After comforting me, he went into the kitchen to prepare lunch. A while later, I trailed after him into the kitchen, hesitating before asking, "Were you teaching earlier?" He paused for a moment, then nodded. "Then, did your students hear everything when I caused a scene just now?" Andrew Tate smiled, lightly tapping my nose. "Who knows you'd lose your temper so quickly?" During the month I was recovering, Andrew Tate's mother even came from abroad to visit me. Andrew Tate's mother is Russian, while his father was Chinese. His father passed away a few years ago, and his mother, afraid of the heartbreak of staying in their old home, returned to Russia. This was the first time I met Andrew Tate's mother. She had crystal clear blue eyes, just like Andrew Tate. However, during a meal, Andrew Tate's mother told me that when Andrew Tate was a child, he hated his blue eyes. This was because other children would treat him as different and deliberately isolate him, leading to a period where Andrew Tate did not want to attend school. There was even a time when he ran away from home to avoid school, but fortunately, the police found him and brought him back. Hearing this, I felt a pang of sorrow for Andrew Tate and placed a piece of meat on his plate. Andrew Tate's mother suddenly frowned. "Anto doesn't eat beef, does he?" Andrew Tate responded with a hum, then took the piece of meat and placed it back into my bowl, smiling as he said, "Vivian Hayes likes it, so she gives me what she likes." "Andrew Tate doesn't eat beef?" Seeing my surprise, Andrew Tate's mother smiled and explained, Anto is allergic to beef and lamb, and he can't even drink cow's milk. If it weren't for that, I would have insisted on taking him back to Russia with me when he was younger. No wonder Andrew Tate once said he didn't like drinking milk tea, and the next day, he even dressed like an Arab. He was probably having an allergic reaction at the time. Andrew Tate's mother only stayed for a few days, before returning home. Before leaving, she promised to send me Andrew Tate's childhood photo album to look through. Both Andrew Tate's mother and I believed that the baby in my belly would be as adorable as Andrew Tate was as a child, hopefully with those same blue eyes. After staying home to recover for more than half a month, I decided to return to work. But the night before my first day back, Andrew Tate started acting cold again. "Dr. Tate, look, my injury is almost healed." "There's nothing to do at home anyway," I said, wrapping my arms around Andrew Tate's neck and whining, "Why don't you let me go back to work?" Andrew Tate remained unmoved by my plea, raising an eyebrow with a cold smirk. "Healed, you say? Then tonight, why don't you apply the medicine yourself? And show me?" Me? Even when I was healthy, it was difficult for me to apply medicine to my own back. He was clearly making things hard for me on purpose. When Andrew Tate entered the bedroom, I was struggling to apply the medicine by myself. He stood leisurely by the wardrobe, holding a cup of tea, watching my clumsy attempts with amusement. Only after he had seen enough and his conscience finally kicked in, did he approach to help. Annoyed, I avoided his assistance and turned off the lights to go to sleep. In the middle of the night, I felt someone gently lifting my shirt. When I opened my eyes, I saw Andrew Tate meticulously applying the medicine for me. The warm light from the bedside lamp cast a soft glow on his face, reflecting the tenderness and care in his eyes. During the day, he had been so cold and distant. My heart suddenly softened. Without worrying about the medicine smudging onto Andrew Tate's shirt, I clung tightly to him like an octopus. "Did I wake you?" he asked, looking down at me. I shook my head, burying my face into his neck and planting a gentle kiss. The next morning, it was Andrew Tate who woke me up. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw him smiling brightly at me, his expression full of satisfaction. While washing my face, I looked into the mirror and saw the marks all over my neck. Furious, I told him to keep his distance from me. "Keep a distance," he muttered irritably while driving me to work. "Aren't we already this close to each other?" Chapter 4. City B is a small city, and when the murder-rape case was reported by the media, it immediately caused a stir throughout the city. Out of nowhere, an account appeared, uploading a video showing the girl who reported the crime being beaten by the rapist in an alley. The camera angle in the video only captured the entrance of the alley. Heart-wrenching screams echoed from the pitch-black alley, each cry filled with despair. The video was only 90 seconds long, but I had to pause it countless times. The actions of the murderer-rapist sent chills down people's spines, yet the public's attention remained focused on the victim. Someone revealed the identity of the girl who reported the crime online, Lucy Miller, 18 years old, a dropout working night shifts at a bar, dressed provocatively. She was pushed into the spotlight by public opinion, and her identity seemed to make the tragedy more understandable. Since the alley was located in the old quarter and the surveillance cameras had long been broken, we could only rely on the video to identify the person who filmed it. The person who recorded the video was a middle-aged man who happened to pass by the alley that night. Before she entered, there were already cries for help coming from the alley. I was so scared at the time that I didn't dare to look inside. Strangely enough, the girl initially walked behind me, then suddenly, as if possessed, rushed into the alley. At noon, I visited the girl at the hospital. Andrew Tate texted me, saying he hadn't had lunch yet, so I went to his favorite tea shop to buy him a sandwich. When I arrived at his office, I saw a strange woman in a pink suit looking at Andrew Tate with gentle eyes. I softly knocked on the door. "I'm not interrupting, am I?" "I need you to interrupt." Andrew Tate smiled at me, pushing the bag on the table toward the woman sitting across from him. "While you were studying abroad, I got married." The woman's face turned pale, her voice trembling. "Andrew, I thought you were just angry with me." Thank you for the lunch. His tone was polite yet distant, but my wife has already brought me lunch. During lunch with Andrew Tate, he seemed tense, as if facing an adversary. Holding my hand, he carefully explained, an ex-girlfriend. Before I met you, we only dated for 3 days. These days, who doesn't have an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend? I found it amusing and deliberately teased him, Dr. Tate, you're already 30 this year. If you didn't have an ex-girlfriend, people might think something's wrong with you. Andrew Tate bit into his sandwich, looking proud. Don't you already know if there's anything wrong with me? True. I glanced at my increasingly round belly and nodded in agreement. So, what happened next? What happened next? I asked, curious. Andrew Tate rubbed his chin, looking slightly troubled, and softly said, You're supposed to ask me, who was that woman? And then cry and make a scene with me. Seeing that I didn't react, he lowered his head, took another bite of his sandwich, and muttered under his breath in frustration, Great, my wife isn't worried about me at all. I'm about to be snatched away by an evil woman. That afternoon, I went with my colleagues to visit the girl's hospital room. Rumors were spreading everywhere. Faced with online backlash and her father's harsh criticism, she sat pale-faced, staring blankly out the window, not saying a word. Lucy Miller, according to your statement, when you called the police, the attacker had already fled. But eyewitnesses say the criminal didn't run until the police arrived. So, you weren't the first to report the crime. Who used your phone to call the police? Or, in other words, who are you trying to protect? It's me, a voice echoed. Lucy Miller, who had been calm, suddenly became agitated. She sprang up from the hospital bed and shouted toward the door, Who gave you permission to come here? What are you doing here? Get out. I turned my head to see a girl with a high ponytail, dressed in a high school uniform, standing at the doorway. The dark circles under her eyes were a clear sign of a 12th grade student. Her pale fingers clutched the strap of her backpack as her whole body trembled. That night, the first person dragged into the alley was me. It was you who rushed in, handed me the phone, told me to run, call the police, and not look back. Lucy Miller, ignoring the injuries on her body, grabbed the girl's wrist and dragged her out, angrily shouting, I told you to shut up. The girl struggled to free herself from Lucy Miller's grip, sobbing uncontrollably. But I saw what people said about you online. They said you deserved it because of the way you dressed. They said you dressed like that to seduce men. They said working in a place like that means you're not a good girl. The girl spoke through her sobs, tears falling one by one onto the floor. But I know you're a good person. If you weren't, why would you have bravely rushed into the alley that night to save me? Lucy Miller's eyes immediately reddened. She lost the strength to push the girl away and collapsed to the ground, crying bitterly. Aren't you in 12th grade? About to take your college entrance exams? You have a bright future ahead of you. Why won't you listen? Why did you come back? Isn't what happened to me enough? In the end, the two girls embraced each other, sobbing uncontrollably. Their words left everyone in the hospital room stunned. No one moved for a long time. The truth no longer mattered. What mattered was that we all knew they were both good girls. At the end of the year, the epidemic suddenly broke out, plunging City W into chaos. Eventually, the entire city was placed under lockdown. Many doctors and nurses from General Hospital B were sent to City W to provide support, including Andrew Tate. Although City B was not completely locked down, movement was restricted, and residential areas were tightly monitored. All police officers in the team were deployed to the front lines, but since I was pregnant, I was allowed to stay and work within the city. The deployment order came unexpectedly. Late at night, when Andrew Tate was about to leave, I stood at the residential gate to see him off. As he took a few steps forward, a young woman emerged from the shadows. Where do you think you're going? Are you, as a police officer, abusing your authority to help your family escape? I was about to explain when the elderly security guard at the gate spoke up. Young lady, didn't you see the announcement in the WeChat group? Why are you making baseless accusations here? Her husband is the deputy head of obstetrics at General Hospital B, and now he's heading to City W to assist with the epidemic. Are you really going to W? The woman stared at Andrew Tate in disbelief. Are you out of your mind? Andrew Tate didn't answer her. Instead, he held me tightly, remaining silent for a long time. As I nestled in Andrew Tate's embrace, I realized that this woman was his ex-girlfriend. Young man, go on now. We'll take care of Vivian. An elderly woman called down from a balcony nearby. That's right, we'll look after her, others chimed in. Voices echoed from the upper floors, some young, some old, some innocent and tender. Andrew Tate bowed gratefully toward the residents, then kissed me through his mask, before bending down to kiss my now slightly rounded belly. His eyes looked at me as if they held countless unspoken words, but in the end, he only said one sentence, wait for me to come back. Andrew Tate and I had been married for 4 months. We hadn't even had the chance to enjoy our newlywed time together before facing a long-distance marriage. He jokingly called this separation love in the time of COVID. To take care of me, everyone in the residential area arranged for me to work daytime shifts at the apartment complex and rest at home in the evenings. If Andrew Tate wasn't too busy on his end, he would call me via video, before bed. Tonight, his voice sounded weary, and he kept whining about a sore throat. Ever since he'd been over there, working nonstop for 24 hours, it would have been strange if he didn't have a sore throat. But seeing his tired face behind the mask made my heart ache. If your throat hurts, why are you still calling? Andrew Tate gave a helpless smile. Because I want to hear your voice. Chapter 5. My heart felt like it was being gently squeezed. I quickly changed the subject. Is there anything you need over there? I can figure out a way to send it to you. Andrew Tate thought for a moment, his voice lazy. Then I want you, is that okay? He made me blush, and I pretended to want to hang up. Why don't you go back to work? Andrew Tate immediately turned serious. I'm giving myself 3 minutes to rest. Talk to me a little longer, will you? I murmured an okay, then got out of bed to grab some hot water in the living room. When I returned, I saw Andrew Tate had fallen asleep on the chair. Only when his head tilted to the side did I notice the deep marks behind his ear from wearing a mask for too long. No wonder earlier in the video call, Andrew Tate sat so upright. It was to hide these marks from me. He had been away for more than half a month. The house felt empty without him. I didn't feel like I missed him. Even when I had painful leg cramps in the middle of the night during pregnancy and he wasn't there to soothe me, I didn't feel like I missed him. But at this moment, I suddenly missed Andrew Tate very much. As I hesitated over whether to end the video call, the screen suddenly showed Michael Carter's face, Andrew Tate's colleague. Michael Carter held Andrew Tate's phone and quietly walked out of his room. He said, last night, there was a pregnant woman in the quarantine zone who suffered severe bleeding. Andrew Tate was in the operating room from yesterday afternoon until early this morning. As soon as he left the OR, he didn't even have time to eat before being called to work all day. Yeah, I know he's busy. When I text him, it takes him half a day to reply with just an emoji. Michael Carter chuckled, that's not just an emoji, it's the highlight of his entire day. Sigh, if I'd known you two were so close, I wouldn't have let Andrew Tate go on that blind date in my place. Andrew Tate went on the blind date for you. Yeah, Michael Carter scratched his head, reminiscing, isn't your aunt a nurse at our hospital? Back then, your dad wanted to help you find a blind date, and your aunt immediately set her sights on the single guys at our hospital. The moment Andrew Tate heard your name, he didn't even have time to take off his white coat before grabbing his car keys and rushing off to meet his future father-in-law. I teased, wasn't he just standing in for you? At the time, there was a persistent young lady clinging to me, and I couldn't shake her off. I joked, you've got some charm, Dr. Carter, busy as you are, you still have girls chasing after you? Michael Carter began to laugh. After laughing himself tired, he leaned back against the chair outside the break room and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled up from his fingers, softening the sharp lines of his brows. After a long pause, I heard him chuckle bitterly. Actually, it wasn't them chasing me. I was the one relentlessly chasing after them. After Lucy Miller's story made it to mainstream media, many companies expressed their willingness to offer her a job with a better working environment. Some even volunteered to sponsor her through college. In the end, she decided to work for a decent local company and planned to start her new job right after being discharged from the hospital tomorrow morning. During the day, I was on duty at the community support center, so I couldn't see her off. I planned to visit her at the hospital tonight after my shift. The hospital was very close to the residential area, just across the street and through a small alley. Winter in City B brought early nights. By 6 in the evening, the sky was already pitch black. Due to the lockdown caused by the pandemic, the streets were deserted, with only a few people passing by. The snow on the ground sparkled with a golden hue under the orange streetlights, so bright it made me squint slightly. Suddenly, I heard the crack of a branch breaking under the snow as someone stepped on it. Right after, a naked man dashed out from behind a tree. At first, he intended to run straight at me, but upon noticing the police uniform under my padded coat, he quickly changed direction and slipped on the snow. After taking him to the station, he caused a commotion, pretending to be drunk. When he realized he couldn't escape, he finally admitted his wrongdoing and wrote a statement of apology. When I arrived at the hospital, Lucy Miller and her mother were packing their belongings. Lucy Miller's mother had the reddish-brown complexion typical of farmers who work under the sun. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes were deep, and her rough hands kept stroking the patterns on the short jacket Lucy had worn when admitted to the hospital. She gently advised, from now on, go to work on time, leave on time, and stop wearing such revealing clothes. Lucy Miller, sitting on the hospital bed, frowned and retorted, "Mom, what does my work have to do with what I wear?" Her mother suddenly became agitated. Pointing at her as if scolding, "Haven't you suffered enough already?" "Auntie," I said, pushing the door open and addressing the mother and daughter, who were on the verge of tears. "It's currently 8 p.m. Beijing time. 2 hours ago, on my way to the hospital, even while wearing this police uniform, I was still harassed by a man." I then pulled out my phone to show them a photo. Look, I even have a picture of his written apology on my phone. After seeing it, they looked at me in astonishment, as if to say, "You're a police officer, how could he dare?" I smiled and said, "As you can see, harassment against women has nothing to do with their profession, their attire, or the time they leave work. My police uniform can temporarily protect me, but I wonder, what would happen if I weren't wearing it?" "Auntie," I continued, holding the mother's hand, "the way to protect a flower is not to prevent it from blooming. The girls need to know how to love their bodies, they also have the right to wear beautiful dresses. Moreover, why do girls always have to be flowers? If they want, they can be roses, or they can be armor, or anything they wish to become." Even though that man didn't do anything to me, at that moment, I was so frightened I almost fell. Worried about the baby in my belly, after saying goodbye to Lucy Miller and her child, I went to the obstetrics department for an ultrasound check. Unfortunately, the person on duty tonight was none other than Andrew Tate's ex-girlfriend, Nicole Kidman. She was Andrew Tate's senior when he was in college. After graduating, she and Andrew Tate worked at the same hospital and even bought a house in the family area of the hospital. I had never met her before because she had been studying abroad for half a year. I braced myself as I lay on the examination bed. Thankfully, in the end, the baby was fine. Before I left, Nicole Kidman called me back. With a mocking expression, she said, "Vivian Hayes, did you know that Andrew Tate has someone he loves so deeply he could never forget her?" Chapter 6. That evening, during a video call with Andrew Tate, I wasn't in a good mood. Andrew Tate thought I was still shaken by what had happened a few days ago, so he gently comforted me until I fell asleep. The next morning, when I woke up, I realized the video call on WeChat had lasted until 5 a.m., only ending when Andrew Tate left for work. I was 6 months pregnant, and the city of W had just announced there were no longer any COVID-19 cases. When Andrew Tate came home, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He walked in wearing slippers, moving from the living room to stand behind me. Resting his head on my shoulder like a big puppy, he inhaled deeply with every breath. "What are you making?" he asked. Without looking up, I continued cooking. "Dinner. What do you feel like eating?" "Oh," he murmured, as if discovering something amusing. He buried his face into my neck and chuckled softly. "I can actually place an order?" Before I could respond, Andrew Tate suddenly wrapped his arms around my waist. With a tug, I stumbled a step back and fell right into his embrace. His warm breath brushed against my ear, and I heard his low laughter. "But honestly, I'd rather eat you." Sensing where this might lead, I quickly pushed him away. "Go take a shower already. You've been outside all day, you're filthy." Andrew Tate leaned down, stealing a quick kiss from my lips, and laughed cheekily. "Fine, just one kiss then." Later that evening, while tidying up Andrew Tate's belongings, a dark green envelope slipped out of his coat pocket. A corner of the letter peeked out, and as I picked it up, I caught a glimpse of bold, masculine handwriting on the paper. "Anna Brooks, I'm sorry. If I make it back alive, can you forgive me?" The next lines I couldn't bear to read further, hastily stuffing the envelope back into Andrew Tate's jacket pocket. In my mind, Nicole Kidman's provocative words from that day at the hospital suddenly echoed, "Vivian Hayes, you can't imagine how much Andrew Tate likes her. As for you, you're just a good marriage partner Andrew Tate chose." Nicole Kidman wasn't wrong. Andrew Tate and I truly were partners who mutually chose each other for marriage. Since our wedding, I've always felt that he treated me in a very special way. I don't know if it's just an illusion, but I could sense Andrew Tate's love for me. Clearly, this peaceful coexistence after marriage was what I had hoped for, but humans always seem greedy, never satisfied. So, when I saw Andrew Tate carefully handing that deep blue envelope to her at the coffee the next day, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Even though I knew, given Andrew Tate's character, he would never develop any sort of relationship with her, the thought of him still having feelings for her made my heart ache. My mind was in turmoil. That night, I texted Andrew Tate, saying I missed home and wanted to stay with my father for a few days. My father found it strange. In the past, when Andrew Tate wasn't home, he'd call me to come back, and I wouldn't. But now that Andrew Tate was home, I suddenly wanted to leave. He even called Andrew Tate directly, to ask if we'd had a fight. After receiving Andrew Tate's denial, my father immediately hung up and happily headed to the kitchen to cook me a few dishes. I stayed at home for 3 days. During that time, I still responded to Andrew Tate's texts as usual, but I no longer wanted to answer his video calls before bed. On the 4th day, as I headed out for work, I saw Andrew Tate standing in the snow outside my house, wearing a thin black coat. At his feet was a scattered pile of cigarette butts. As I approached, Andrew Tate hurriedly extinguished the cigarette he had been smoking. I didn't know how long he had been standing there, his nose and ears were red from the cold. When he saw me, he looked a little aggrieved, his eyes also turning red. He opened his mouth, his hoarse voice sounding tired, but he still tried to say, "Are you heading to work? Let me drive you." I felt a pang of heartache, nodded, and walked toward the passenger seat. Andrew Tate quickly opened the car door for me. We remained silent throughout the drive. Andrew Tate kept one hand on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing at me, but I always turned my face to look out the window, clearly showing that I didn't want to talk. When we got out of the car, he suddenly grabbed my hand. His voice was a bit choked, hoarse as he said, "Vivian, did I do something wrong?" "No, then why won't you come home?" "There are some things I haven't figured out yet." "Is it something related to me?" Andrew Tate looked at me, his breathing quickened, anxious as if awaiting a verdict. I stayed silent for a long time. His voice trembled, his hand still gripping my wrist, tighter and tighter. "If it's something about me, then just say it, let's solve it together, can't we?" After another long silence, I finally said, "Nicole Kidman told me that you once liked a girl you couldn't forget. That day, I saw her, at the coffee under our building. I saw you give her a letter. I don't like her. Andrew Tate's eyes flickered, as if a fleeting emotion crossed them. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, I never liked anyone before either. Anna Brooks is the one Michael Carter liked, but he can no longer talk to her. Andrew Tate paused at this point and continued, because Michael Carter passed away half a month ago. Passed away? My head suddenly buzzed, and I could only repeat Andrew Tate's last two words. A month ago, he performed a C-section for a pregnant woman infected in the quarantine zone. During the surgery, the woman suffered a critical hemorrhage, and her husband, who was also infected, rushed in out of nowhere. In the chaos, he tore apart Michael's protective suit. Chapter 7. Then, Andrew Tate took several deep breaths, but still couldn't continue speaking. That evening after work, I obediently followed Andrew Tate home. Dinner was filled with an awkward atmosphere. I hurriedly ate a few bites and then escaped to the bedroom. Previously, I had misunderstood Andrew Tate in anger without knowing the full story. Now, I was so embarrassed I wished I could find a hole to crawl into. In the middle of the night, Andrew Tate gently crawled over from the other side of the blanket. His masculine scent, along with the warmth of his body, immediately enveloped me. He lightly brushed his nose against my ear, his voice still hoarse, sounding both raspy and warm. Vivian Hayes, you made me feel so neglected. You didn't kiss me or hug me when I came home. I chuckled softly and poked his cheek lightly. Little Andrew Tate, how old are you this year? I don't care, Andrew Tate said, pulling me and the blanket tightly into his arms as he fell asleep. Just as I started to drift off, the man above me suddenly lifted his head, seemingly realizing something, and asked, Vivian Hayes, are you jealous? The misunderstanding about Andrew Tate's white moonlight seemed to have brought us closer. Specifically, Andrew Tate had become even clingier. There was a time I passed by the hospital and decided to wait for him to finish work so we could go home together. At that moment, he was seriously instructing a patient on post-surgery precautions, but as soon as he stepped out of the room and saw me, he ran over and called out, my love. If I hadn't seen Andrew Tate being so serious while treating patients in the clinic, I would have found it hard to believe he was the same person. Today, when I went for a prenatal checkup, the sky was overcast, so I brought an umbrella. Andrew Tate said he had surgery scheduled for the afternoon and told me to meet with his intern at the hospital for the examination. When I left the hospital, it had started to drizzle outside. Although the distance from home to the hospital wasn't far, walking back could still leave me soaked. So, I texted Andrew Tate, telling him I was waiting in the hospital lobby. He went outside but didn't see me standing in a corner. I saw him pick up his phone, intending to call me. Just as I was about to call him, I saw Nicole Kidman walking up to him with two umbrellas. I watched as Andrew Tate frowned and refused, if I can't find an umbrella I like, I'd rather walk in the rain. Nicole Kidman bit her lip, unwilling to give up, and asked, is it worth it? Loving her has made you do so many things that aren't like you at all. Andrew Tate smiled, but it was a mocking smile. Looking at the girl in front of him, he said, so what? As long as it's for her. If she doesn't feel safe, I can become someone who clings to her endlessly. Hearing this, I couldn't hold back anymore. I stepped out from the corner and waved at Andrew Tate. When Andrew Tate saw me, his gaze softened, and he said gently, my umbrella has arrived. As for my ex-boyfriend, Victor Bennett, cheating on me, I always appeared very calm. I acted like a mature adult, decisive, no crying, no drama, and broke up quietly. I even managed to save face for both of us. I thought I was strong enough until, in the middle of the night, I woke up in tears. Victor Bennett and I had been in love for 7 years. Right after graduating from university, we were inseparable. We overcame all the challenges of a long-distance relationship, but when it came time to discuss marriage, he let me go. In matters of love, both parties share responsibility. I never intended to place blame, and instead, I constantly found myself filled with self-reproach. Eventually, I realized that I lacked the strength to love someone wholeheartedly or to fully trust anyone again. So, when I felt a spark with Andrew Tate, my first reaction was fear. Could he be someone I could trust? Could he be someone worthy of my love? Strangely enough, Andrew Tate seemed to have a magical way of seeing through all my insecurities and pretenses. It was as if he could read me completely. Just like now, he said, she doesn't feel secure, so I need to stay close to her. The news about my father came one evening when I was 7 months pregnant. At that time Andrew Tate and I were sitting on the sofa watching TV. He received a phone call, and after a few words from the person on the other end, he looked at me with immediate concern. After ending the call, Andrew Tate firmly held my hand and said, "Vivian Hayes, I need you to stay calm and listen to me. Tonight, your father went out for a walk and was unfortunately hit by a drunk truck driver. He's in the hospital now, and things don't look good. I'll help you get dressed, and we'll go there together." That night, my father passed away. At that time, he was in the emergency room, unconscious the entire time. We didn't get a chance to exchange a single word. I never expected that the last time I would see him was when he came to deliver food for me and Andrew Tate. That hurried glance as he closed the door became the final look exchanged between father and daughter. Most of my father's funeral arrangements were handled by Andrew Tate. I was heavily pregnant, making it inconvenient for me to do much. Andrew Tate, worried I wouldn't be able to cope, took a few days off to stay by my side. During that time, my emotions remained surprisingly stable. I ate, slept, and rested as usual. The calmer I appeared, the more uneasy Andrew Tate became. He said, "Vivian Hayes, you should cry. Let it out, it'll be better for you." A few days later, I finally broke down while having dinner. It happened when I accidentally dropped a potato to the floor. It was the last potato from the basket of vegetables my father had brought over. Chapter 8. I tried to bend down to pick it up, but with my 7-month belly, bending over was very difficult. I couldn't even see my own feet. Failing, I plopped down onto the chair and burst into sobs. Andrew Tate, his eyes red, stood up and pulled me into his arms. I cried against his chest, "Andrew Tate, I don't have a father anymore. I don't have a home anymore." Andrew Tate knelt before me, carefully wiping the tears from my face. He took my hand and placed it on my belly, speaking each word slowly and deliberately. "Vivian Hayes, you still have me, and you have the baby in your belly. We are your family. We are your home." In that moment, I suddenly understood why my father had been so adamant about me getting married. Most of our generation are only children. Wherever our parents are, that's where our home is. If one day our parents are no longer here, we become lonely blades of grass, drifting with the wind. But things aren't always absolute. My father's insistence was only half correct. Being single doesn't necessarily mean being lonely, and being married doesn't always solve loneliness. I am one of the lucky ones, because I have Andrew Tate, who loves me. That night, as we lay in bed, Andrew Tate held me while leaning against the headboard, flipping through the photo album his mother had sent from abroad this afternoon. We started from the back and worked our way to the front. When we reached a photo of Andrew Tate in his high school uniform, I was startled to realize that we had attended the same high school. Andrew Tate said nothing for a moment before suddenly speaking, "Vivian Hayes, I want to tell you a secret." "What is it?" He bent down and kissed my forehead, saying, "Actually, I've liked you for a long time. Before you gradually fell in love with me, I had already loved you from the very first moment I saw you." I looked at him in surprise, because, in my memory, before the blind date, I had never met Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate said, "When I was a kid, I met you at the children's hospital. At that time I was being teased by some kids in the ward because of my eyes. Then, out of nowhere, you appeared, stood behind me, and loudly defended me, saying my eyes didn't harm anyone, so why should they use my eyes to hurt me? In the end, you even boldly warned them that your mother was a police officer who specialized in dealing with bad people." At this point, Andrew Tate laughed. "At that moment, in my eyes, you were like a righteous heroine. I didn't even get the chance to thank you before you turned around and started crying loudly because you were scared of getting a shot. I thought I had found a new friend, but the next day you were discharged from the hospital. Back then, I even went to your bed to check your name. I shifted to a comfortable position in Andrew Tate's arms and said sadly, actually, when I was little, I wasn't afraid of injections. I cried loudly just so my mom would show up and cover my eyes. My mom was a police officer, and her job was very busy. When I was a child, she would only rush to me from wherever she was when I got sick. I closed my eyes, reminiscing. Do you remember the first time I had my period? There wasn't any adult woman around, and I didn't even know how to use a sanitary pad. In the end, Dad had to knock on the neighbor's door to ask Auntie to teach me. Because Mom wasn't often around, when I was little, I really wanted to get her attention. When I was younger, I was rebellious. Sometimes Mom would show up to scold me, and I'd think, if she doesn't care about me, what right does she have to demand anything from me? There were times I really hated her. Andrew Tate stroked my head gently and said, "But you've forgiven your mom, haven't you? I heard you inherited her police badge." That's right. Later, when I started working, I gradually came to understand her. But by then, she was already gone. If only she were still alive, I said seriously, looking at Andrew Tate. She would definitely like you. Yeah, Andrew Tate nodded in agreement. We continued flipping through the photo album until suddenly, we came across a picture of a young Andrew Tate with a female police officer. When I looked closely at the person in the photo, I was so shocked I almost jumped. Trembling, I pointed at the young, vibrant policewoman in the corner of the photo, with her red lips, white teeth, and confident demeanor, and said, "That's my mom." Andrew Tate froze for a moment, then said, "Back then, my mom insisted on sending me to daycare, but I couldn't handle the teasing from the other kids, so I ran away from home. While wandering the streets, I got scared and remembered you saying your mom was a police officer who dealt with bad guys. I saw a police station in the distance and ran straight there. After that, a female police officer took me home. My mom even took a special photo of me with her." Andrew Tate chuckled softly and said with a sigh, "So, it turns out I met your mom back then." Neither Andrew Tate nor I believed in fate, but at that moment, we couldn't help but marvel at the wonders of destiny. I wrapped my arms around his neck, gazed into his blue eyes, and said, "I love you." Andrew Tate nodded, looking at me, then gently closed his eyes. I let go, and teased him, "Did you think I was going to kiss you?" Andrew Tate suddenly turned the tables, pushing me down, his eyes unable to hide the desire, "But I really want to kiss you." "So, you're deliberately seducing me?" Andrew Tate playfully blew gently into my ear and softly asked, "So, have I succeeded?" When he leaned down to kiss me, I refused to give in, placing my hand over his mouth and firmly asking, "There are plenty of people with the same name. How are you so sure it's me?" "Because I never stopped searching for you." Andrew Tate smiled faintly and kissed the palm of my hand. "Back in high school, I intentionally repeated a year just to transfer to your school, which ended up making me a grade below you." "Oh, little brother." Andrew Tate's breath as he leaned down carried a warm yet slightly stinging sensation, brushing against my neck. "Don't rush, let me catch my breath." We were entangled until midnight, and I eventually fell asleep. In a daze, I felt Andrew Tate gently kiss my forehead. During the days I couldn't see you, I tried to get used to it. But I realized that without you, it only became more painful. I heard Andrew Tate's voice, steadfast as if the sun would surely rise tomorrow, softly whispering in my ear. "So, Vivian Hayes, don't worry. I love you."